Chapter 5. The Explorers Find Treasure. The next morning Jessie woke up first, and she got up at once, for she was the housekeeper. The dog sat in the door of the car and looked at her as she jumped down to get the milk for breakfast. Then he jumped down after her. Jessie walked down by the little brook and stopped to look at the waterfall. It was beautiful. "I must look in the refrigerator," she said with a laugh. It was a funny refrigerator. There was a rock behind the waterfall, and the night before Jessie had put the 2 bottles of milk in the hole in this rock. Now she took out the bottles and found that the milk was very cold. "Is it good?" called Benny, who sat in the car door. "It is delicious," cried Jessie. "It is cold, too." She got up into the car with the milk and sat down beside Benny. Then the 4 children drank the milk for breakfast. Henry said, "Today I'll go into town and try to get some work to do. I can cut grass or work in a garden or something. Then we'll have something besides milk for breakfast." He washed his hands and face and started out. "I'm so glad you have a dog, Jessie," he said. "Goodbye. I'll be back at noon." The children looked after Henry, and then they looked at Jessie. "What are we going to do now, Jessie?" Benny asked his sister. "Well, Benny," answered Jessie, "we'll go exploring and look for treasures. We'll begin here at the car and look until we find a dump." "What's a dump?" asked Benny. "Oh, Benny," said Violet, "you know what a dump is. Old tin cans and old dishes and bottles." "Are old tin cans and dishes treasures?" Benny wanted to know. "They will be treasures for us," answered Jessie, laughing. "And wheels?" asked Benny again. "Will there be any wheels on the dump?" "Yes, maybe," replied Violet. "But cups, Benny, and plates and maybe spoons. You like to drink milk out of a cup." "Oh, yes," agreed Benny politely. But anyone could see that his mind was still on wheels. The explorers started walking down the old rusty tracks, with Watch hopping along on 3 legs. The other paw, still tied up with Jessie's handkerchief, was held off the ground. But the dog looked very happy. He liked these kind children. They all walked along through the woods, looking this way and that. After a while the old track came out into the sun, and the explorers found they were on top of a hill. They could look down and see the town below them. "Henry is down there," said Jessie. Benny was walking along behind his 2 sisters. Suddenly he cried happily, "Look, Jessie! There's a treasure! A wheel!" The girls looked where he was pointing, and they saw a big dump with many old bottles and tin cans on it. There were also both wheels and cups. Indeed, there were dishes of all kinds. "Oh, Benny," cried Jessie, "you saw the treasures first. What should we do without you?" Violet ran over to the dump. "Here's a white pitcher, Jessie," she cried. Jessie looked at it. It was all right, with only one small crack. "Here's a big white cup, too," she said happily. "Can you use a teapot, Jessie?" asked Benny. "Yes, indeed," she replied. "We can put water in it. I have found 2 cups and a bowl. Let's look for spoons, too." Violet held up what she had found. 5 spoons, covered with rust. "Good," said Jessie. "Here's a big kettle. Let's pile all the dishes in it. Then we can carry them back to the boxcar." Benny had found 4 wheels just alike and laid them to one side. Now he held up a pink cup. There was a big crack in it, but it had a handle. "This will be my pink cup," said Benny. "I hope it will hold milk," said Jessie, laughing. "It's a beautiful cup, Benny." The children laid all their treasures, even the wheels, on a board, and the girls carried the board back to the boxcar between them. They put the dishes down by the brook. "Now we must wash them," said Jessie. "All right," agreed Benny. "We'll wash my pink cup." And never did a little boy hand dishes so carefully to his sisters as Benny did. The girls washed the dishes with soap, and Jessie used sand to get the rust off the spoons. "There," she said, washing the last shining spoon. "How fine they look! But I'm afraid they still aren't clean enough to eat from. When Henry comes, we'll get him to build a fire. Then we can have hot water to rinse them, and they will be very clean." The children sat back and admired the dishes. Suddenly Violet cried, "Oh, I know where to put them! Come see what I found in the car last night." Both girls looked in at the door. "Look on the door on the other side of the car," said Violet. All Jessie saw were 2 pieces of wood nailed to the closed door of the car. But she knew at once what was in Violet's mind. She ran to get the board they had carried from the dump and laid it carefully across the 2 pieces of wood. It made a fine shelf for the dishes. "There," said Jessie. The children could hardly wait to put the shining dishes on the shelf. "Let's put them on now," said Violet, "and see how they look, without waiting to rinse them." When they were on the shelf, Violet picked some white and yellow flowers and put them in a cup full of water in the middle of the shelf. "There," said Jessie, stepping back to look at it. "You said 'there' 3 times," remarked Benny happily. "So I did," replied Jessie, laughing, "and I'm going to say it again." She pointed into the woods and said, "There!" Henry was coming through the woods, and he carried many funny-looking bundles in his arms. But he would not open his bundles or tell what he had been doing until it was time for dinner. "Where did you get the dishes?" he cried when he saw the shelf. "We went exploring," said Violet, "and found a big dump." The children began telling him about their treasures. Benny told them about the tin cans and his pink cup and his wheels. Jessie took out the big kettle and asked him about building a fire. "We want to use the dishes to eat from," she told him, "and it's hard to get them clean in cold water." So Henry made a small fire in an open place where it could not burn anything. He put big stones all around it. "We ought to have a fireplace," he remarked. Jessie cleaned the kettle with sand and filled it with water. Then Henry put it on the fire. Soon the water was boiling, and Jessie rinsed the dishes carefully. "Now I know they're clean enough to eat from," she said happily. Chapter 7. A Queer Noise in the Night. At last it was dinner time, and the children sat down to see what Henry had in his bundles. "I bought another loaf of brown bread at the store," said Henry, "and some more milk. Then I bought some dried meat, because we can eat it in our hands. And I bought a bone for Watch." Watch looked hungrily at the bone and lay down at once to eat it. Jessie got out 4 cups and bowls and put some milk into each one. Then the children put in little pieces of brown bread and began to eat it with their new spoons. "What fun!" cried Jessie. "Eating with spoons. Now tell us what you did in town, Henry." Henry began. "The town below this hill is Silver City. I saw the name on a sign. I went into the town and walked along the first street I came to. It was a nice street, with big houses and flowers and trees. I saw a man out cutting his grass. He's a good man, too. I can tell you. A doctor." "Did you work for him?" asked Jessie. "Yes," said Henry. "He was very hot, and just as I came to the house, his bell rang. He started to the house, and I called after him and asked him if I could cut the grass. He said, 'Yes, yes, I wish you would.' You see, he wasn't used to cutting it himself. So I cut the grass, and he said, 'Good for you. Do you want to work every day?' And he said he had never had a boy who cut it as well as I did." "Oh, Henry!" cried Violet and Jessie. "I told him I did want to work, and he told me to come back this afternoon. He has a pretty house and a garage and a big vegetable garden. Then he has a lot of cherry trees behind the house. A cherry orchard. You should see the beautiful big red cherries. Well, when I was cutting the grass near the kitchen, the cook came to the kitchen door and watched me. She is big and fat," Henry laughed. "She asked me if I liked cookies. I said I did, and she gave me one." "What did you do with it?" asked Benny hungrily. "When she went back into the kitchen, I put it in my pocket," said Henry, laughing. "Did she see you?" cried Jessie. "Oh, no," said Henry. "I played I was eating it. For a long time I carefully ate away on nothing at all." Benny began to look at Henry's pocket. It did look very funny. Henry went on. "When I came home, the doctor gave me $1, and the cook gave me this bag." Henry laughed at Benny and pulled the bag out of his pocket. In it were 10 delicious brown cookies. "Oh, oh!" cried Benny. "Please, Jessie, let's have cookies for dinner." "Yes, indeed," said Jessie. Then Henry opened his last bundle. "I thought we ought to have a tablecloth," he said, "so I got one at the store. But it wasn't hemmed." Violet begged, "Oh, let me hem it." She took her scissors out of her workbag and cut the 2 ends even. But before she began to hem the pretty blue tablecloth, she helped Jessie wash and rinse the dishes and put them away. Benny helped too. When Henry said goodbye and went back to town, all the children were working happily. Watch was trying to make a hole with one paw to bury his bone in. "I'll help you bury your bone, Watch," said Benny. "Oh, no, Benny," said Jessie. "Watch wants to bury his bone himself. You come and help me. I'm going to make a broom for the house." For a little while Benny ran around finding sticks for the broom, but he soon went to sleep on the ground with the dog for a pillow. The 2 girls sat by the brook. Violet was hemming the blue tablecloth, and Jessie was making the broom with a long stick for a handle. When Henry came back at supper time, the broom with its long handle stood in the kitchen, and the new tablecloth was hemmed. Henry admired the broom and the tablecloth. Then he gave Jessie a small bundle. "Oh, butter!" cried Jessie, her eyes shining. It was butter, yellow and sweet. The 4 children had not had any butter for many days. At last they sat down to their fine supper. "Now this spoon is a magic spoon," said Henry. "Turn it around and use the handle, and it is a knife." He showed Benny how to put butter on the brown bread with his magic knife. With dried meat, bread and butter, milk and cookies, the children could not ask for a better supper. "What did you do this afternoon, Henry?" asked Jessie. "Well, I washed the doctor's car," said Henry. "Then I washed the walks and the windows. Tomorrow I'm going to work in the garden." Then he looked at the brook. "Oh, how I would love to have a swim in that nice cold water." Henry was hot and sticky as he looked at the waterfall. "Maybe we could make a swimming pool," he said. "We could build a dam out of logs." "Oh, yes, we could," said Jessie. "Violet and I know where to find some logs and some big flat stones." "You do?" said Henry. "Yes," said Jessie. "They are not far away. And just a little way below here is a pool now, with sand all around it. But it is not big enough to swim in." "Is that so?" cried Henry. "Some day I'll stay at home, and we'll try to dam up the brook and make a swimming pool." "You can have my wheels," said Benny. "Good," replied Henry. "I'll make you a little cart with the wheels, Benny, and you can carry stones in it." "Yes," said Benny, "I will." "Come now, we must go to bed," said Jessie. The children were all glad to go to bed. They stood on the stump and climbed into their new house, and they all went to sleep but Henry. He was thinking about the new swimming pool. All at once he saw that Watch was not asleep. Henry patted the dog and said, "Lie down, Watch." But Watch did not lie down. He began to growl softly. "Shh," said Henry to the dog. He sat up. Jessie sat up. "What is it, Henry?" she whispered. "I don't know," replied Henry. He was frightened. "I think Watch hears something in the woods." "Let's close the door," said Jessie. "I'm afraid." The two children closed the heavy door softly. Then they sat still and listened, but they did not hear anything. "Lie down, Watch," said Jessie again. "Go to sleep." But Watch did not go to sleep. He growled again. "Maybe someone is in the woods. Maybe someone wants to hide in this car," whispered Jessie. "Maybe," said Henry. "There is something out there that dog doesn't like." Then they heard a stick crack, and Watch barked. "Oh, shh!" Jessie put her hand over his mouth. "If there is someone out in the woods, he knows that there is a dog in this boxcar," said Henry. He took the new broom in his hand and waited. But nothing came. Nothing at all. The two children waited and waited. Violet and Benny slept through it all. "I'm going to open the door now," said Henry. They opened the door softly and then listened. The dog sniffed a little. Then he turned around 3 times and lay down. He put his head on his paws. "It must be all right now," said Henry. "Watch knows. Maybe it was just a rabbit." So at last they all went to sleep and slept until morning. Chapter 7. A Big Meal from Little Onions. The next morning Jessie and Henry talked about the queer noise. They did not tell Violet and Benny. "What do you think it was?" asked Jessie. "Do you think it was a rabbit?" "I don't know," said Henry, "but I think someone was in the woods. I am glad we weren't hurt. Someone must have stepped on a stick and made it crack." "What shall we do?" asked Jessie. "Nothing," said Henry. "Watch is a good watchdog. He loves us now, and if anyone tried to hurt us, Watch would take care of us. He would do more than growl. But after this, we must not let Benny go into the woods alone." "I'll keep Benny and Violet with me all the time," said Jessie. "Good," said Henry, "and keep Watch with you all the time, too." "Good morning, Benny. Time to get up. Today you must build something for me out of stones." "What is it?" asked Benny eagerly. "I'm not going to tell you," said Henry, laughing. "You build it just as Jessie tells you, and you will see." Henry was so eager to begin work that he ran all the way to town. The doctor came to the door and smilingly looked him over from head to foot. "My mother will tell you what to do today," the doctor said. "She wants you to work in her garden." Mrs. Moore, the doctor's mother, had a sweet face and looked very kind. "Good morning, Henry," she said. "Do you know how to thin out vegetables?" "Oh, yes," said Henry. "I like to work in a vegetable garden." "I haven't had much time to take care of my garden," Mrs. Moore said. "There, see that?" She pulled out a carrot. It had to come out, for it was much too near the other carrots. "Yes, I see," said Henry. He began to thin out the carrots. Mrs. Moore watched him as he pulled out some of the little carrots and put them in a pile. He left the other carrots to grow. Then he began on the turnips. "You are a good worker," said Mrs. Moore. "I can see that." She smiled at Henry. "You may thin out all these vegetables." Then she went into the house and left Henry alone. He worked all morning. He thinned out the carrots, turnips, and little onions. The mill bells rang at noon, but Henry did not hear them. He still worked on in the hot sun. Then he saw Mrs. Moore looking at him. "You have worked long enough now," she said. "You may come again this afternoon." "What shall I do with the vegetables I pulled up?" Henry asked. "Oh, I don't want them," said Mrs. Moore. "Just leave them in a pile." "Do you mind if I take them?" asked Henry. No, indeed. Do you have chickens? Then, without waiting for an answer, she went right on. You have done good work. Here is $1. Henry said, "Thank you," and was glad he did not have to answer about the chickens. When Mrs. Moore went into the house, he took some of the little carrots and turnips and onions. If he looked up, he would have seen Mrs. Moore in the window watching him. But he did not look up. He was too eager to get to the store and order some meat. When he arrived at the boxcar, Benny told him, "The building is done. I helped with it." The building was a fireplace made of flat stones. "Benny did a lot of the work," said Jessie. "He carried stones and found wood for the fire." The fireplace was a very good one. The children and Watch had made a hole at the foot of the big rock between the two trees. Flat stones were laid on the floor of this hole and around the sides. More big stones were put up to keep out the wind. Jessie had found a heavy wire in the dump and had put the big kettle on it and tied the ends of the wire to the two trees. The kettle hung over the fireplace, and the fire was laid. Beside the fireplace was a big wood pile. "Fine, fine!" cried Henry. "You have done well. Now see what I have." The girls were delighted with the meat and the little vegetables. With Henry's knife they cut the meat into little pieces. Then they filled the kettle with water from the fountain and put the meat into it, with a tin plate for a cover. Henry started the fire, and it burned well at once. Jessie cut the tops off the vegetables and washed them in the brook. "I'll put them in after the meat has cooked a while," she said. Soon the water began to boil, and the stew began to smell good. Watch sat down and looked at it. He sniffed hungrily at it and barked and barked. The children sat around the fireplace, eating bread and milk. Now and then Jessie stirred the stew with a big spoon. "It will make a good meal," said Henry. "Keep it boiling and do not leave it. When I come home tonight, I'll bring you some salt, and whatever you do, don't get on fire." Violet pointed to the pitcher and teapot that she had filled with water. "That's to put on Benny or Watch if he should get on fire," she said. Henry laughed and went happily on his way. He wished he could stay and smell the stew boiling, but he thought he ought to work, so he went back to Dr. Moore's house. He was very happy when Dr. Moore said, "Do you want to clean up this garage?" The garage was not in very good order. Dr. Moore laughed when he saw Henry look around for a broom. "I must go out now," said Dr. Moore. "You just clean this place up." Henry began at once. First he opened all the boxes. On the biggest box he painted the word "Tools" with a long-handled brush and a can of paint that he had found. On another box he painted "Nails." Then he picked over the things and put the tools in the toolbox and the nails in the nail box. This was fun for Henry, because he liked to get things in order. Henry found a lot of nails that were bent and covered with rust. He put them in his pocket. "I'll ask the doctor for these bent nails," he said to himself. "They are no good to him, but they are fine for me. I can use every old nail I get." Then he washed the floor and washed his paintbrush. When Dr. Moore came home, he found Henry putting brushes, paint cans, and other things on the shelf. "My, my, my!" he cried. He looked at the garage and laughed and laughed. He laughed until his mother came out to see what he was laughing at. "Look, Mother," he said. "Look at those tools. Look at the shelf. Look at my hammers. 1, 2, 3, 4 hammers. Your hammer, my hammer, and 2 other hammers. They were all lost. Can you use a hammer, Henry?" "Yes, indeed, I can," cried Henry. "Take one," said Dr. Moore. "You found them all." "Oh, thank you," said Henry. He showed the doctor the bent nails and was told that he could have those too. He could hardly wait now to start home, because he was so eager to show Benny and his sisters his new hammer and nails. "Tomorrow will be Sunday," said Dr. Moore. "You will come again the next day?" "Oh, yes," replied Henry, who had lost all track of the days. "The cherries must be picked," said the doctor. He looked at Henry in a queer way. "We could use any number of cherry pickers, if they were all as careful as you." "Could you?" asked Henry eagerly. "Well, I'll come." So the three said goodbye, and Henry started for home. He had another $1, a pocketful of nails, a hammer, and the pile of vegetables that he had left at noon. On the way home he bought some salt. When he arrived at the boxcar, he began to smell a delicious smell. "Onions!" he shouted, running up to the kennel. "I do like the smell of onions." "I like the turnips best," said Violet. Jessie took off the cover carefully and stirred in the salt, and Henry sniffed the brown stew. It was boiling and boiling. "A ladle of all things!" cried Henry. "Where did you get it?" "I found a tin cup in the dump," said Jessie. "We used a long stick for a handle, and tied it to the cup with a piece of wire. It makes a fine ladle." She ladled out the stew into plates and bowls and put a spoon in each one. "Oh, oh," said Benny, "I am so hungry. I must eat my supper." The meat was well cooked, and the vegetables were delicious. Violet passed her plate for more turnips. "I'd like some more onions," said Henry. All the children ate until they could eat no more. "That was the best meal I ever ate," said Jessie. "Me too," said Violet. "I have time tonight to make Benny's cart," remarked Henry. "We'll want a cart." "Will you make it with my wheels?" asked Benny. "Yes, with your wheels," answered Henry. "But you must cart stones in it when I get it done." "Yes," said Benny. "I will cart stones or rocks or anything." "Tomorrow will be Sunday, and I can stay at home," Henry went on. "Do you think it's all right, Jessie, to build the dam for a swimming pool on Sunday?" "Yes, I do," said Jessie. "We are making the swimming pool so that we can keep clean." Henry began happily to hammer out the bent nails with his new hammer. Soon he had some good nails. "You and I will go and find some boards, Benny," he said. "Come on." Soon the boys came back with some boards from the dump. Henry sat down and began to make the cart. He could not see very well, because it was getting dark, and there was no moon. But at last the cart was done, and he gave it to Benny. "Thank you," said Benny politely. After his sisters had admired the cart, Benny pulled it around just for fun. Then Henry put it in the boxcar for the night. Henry said to Jessie, "I hope we do not hear that queer noise tonight." "I hope not too," said Jessie. Then she laughed. "Look at Benny," she said. "He has gone to sleep with his hand on his cart." Henry laughed too, but he laughed at himself, because he was going to sleep with his new hammer under his pillow.